Matt Mitchell, welcome to the
Thank you.
Brooklyn Living Room Sessions.
Yeah, nice to have you.
We're super excited to have you because you're a genius. You're a genius composer and piano player. Please accept.
I do. It's just I'm extreme compliments make me very uncomfortable.
Okay.
Sure, but you'd take the genius grant if they gave it to you, right? You wouldn't like turn it down.
Yeah, I'd have to consult with my
Your inner
my
self?
team of.
Oh, okay.
My
Would you
team
put it
of-
on your
my team of
resume? The first
psychics
line,
and-
genius officially designated.
Only if genius was spelled with two E's.
Yeah, there you go.
And a Z.
Yeah, it's spelled wrong would be perfect.
Right.
Well, I was really excited to have you on the show, not just because you're a genius, but because you're a super nice guy. And you might not even know that one of the reasons I live in New York is teeny bit partially because of you.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yes, I
Ruined
was
her
a
life.
student at SIM. I think it was 2008. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, of course I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you never know.
No,
As
yes.
for our other
Yes. No, I remember hearing you play the first day at Sim.
Yeah. So I think that was about 2008, and I was pretty new to improv, maybe a couple years in, and I was really excited about that style of music. And
You'd only been improvising for a couple of years at that point?
I think so. Yeah. What was I saying? Oh yeah.
He ruined
And
your life.
I thought living in New York was a totally unrealistic pipe dream. Like
wow.
it wasn't even a thought that crossed my mind that it was possible. I don't know why. I have to look into a lot of stuff with myself to figure that out. But then you said, what, you could live in New York? Yeah.
I kind of remember this. Yeah.
And that was the first time I was like, maybe I could live in New York. And voila, here I am married with kids in Brooklyn, and you're in my living room. Very
Right.
weird. Anyways.
And I didn't live in New York at the time.
Were
that
you,
I told you.
where
And
were you
at
again?
2008, I was still living in Philadelphia.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
But I kind of...
Are you going to move to Philadelphia now?
Yeah. Yes, that's really what you should do now
Yeah.
if you really want to take my advice.
She's like, no wonder it didn't really.
Right, I thought something was off.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a thing where once people know you're in town, even if you're close, like even if you live in Philadelphia or like upstate, people just assume you're not around. Or they assume you're a little less accessible.
Yeah.
Right.
I've had friends move out of the city and try to like not tell people.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, no, I'm still there, and it's like they can smell it or something. They don't call you. You know, it's just,
And I do it too. I mean, because there's so many people here, and
yeah.
and so it's like, well, as long as this person lives in New York, I'm gonna kind
Right.
of play with them, have them be this person for this band or whatever. But then if they move away, then you're like, oh, okay, well, now I can give this other person a call or whatever.
I was looking you up online, and you work with a whole lot of really creative improvising musicians, unlike, say, I don't know, Keith Jarrett, who played with the same guys for 35 years or something.
Right.
Which means that like the musical philosophy of what you're doing with these people is, you know, in the same vein, but it's different from project to project, right? So can you just talk about going into these situations with a possibility of, with like no possibility of like a comfort zone, you know, like you're not playing with the same band that you've been playing with for a year and rehearsing with them, but it's like a completely different thing that you're being thrown into, and putting yourself into like a mode of freedom, because what you're doing is a lot of free improvisation. So like, how do you feel comfortable in a situation like that where it's just a completely different kind of music?
I do play in a lot of, and have played in a lot of different groups. A lot of them actually have been groups that have done, that have sort of managed to achieve some kind of existence beyond like one record and a couple gigs.
Right.
But which in this scene means like you do a few gigs a year and then, you know, a couple records over the course of like 3 to 5 years or whatever. But so it's not like you play together all the time.
Sure.
But
I saw some diverse stuff.
no, there's definitely some, for
Yeah.
sure. People who like learned about me via, say, playing with Dave Douglas, then were sometimes bemused when they heard me play my whatever, the more slightly left-leaning stuff.
Sure.
Interesting.
I don't know, just like, because he has some fans who are more just, I think, more of the, like, he's kind of like modern mainstream in
Yeah.
the jazz
I think
sense.
so.
Although when the quintet that I was involved with, and that I'm actually still involved with, we actually recorded an album over a distance recorded album over the pandemic. The quintet that I was in with John Robigon and Linda O and Rudy Royston. I mean, we would kind of take it out.
Yeah, I saw that group. It seemed to straddle the fence, sort of go both ways sometimes.
I mean, especially a lot on the tunes that kind of allowed for it when it was time for me to play. Linda and Rudy, I don't know if they saw me. I'm sure it was just because it's just happened to be what they liked also. But I don't know if I was seen as like the crazy uncle in that band, because when it was my turn to play, a lot of times it would just, that's when it would like go to Venus or Neptune or whatever.
I have this great memory of you playing with Dave at Shapeshifter, and it was the album with Aoife O'Donovan, although I don't think it was her. Did Becca?
That might have been Becca on that gig.
And it was one of the tunes that was, not too many changes, very folk-based. Mm-hmm. And then your solo was so wild, but it fit so perfectly in the piece. It was kind of like a sheets of sound type thing.
Really?
But it flowed over the changes like
was it
so
Be Still?
Nice. Yeah. Me and Jesse looked at each other. We're like, "Whoa!"
Because on Be Still, I never really took on this. That was, I guess, the thing about some of those tunes is that it's like okay, well, it's not really the vibe to just kind of play a bunch of out shit on those two. Because I like actually, despite what people might assume about me,
it was perfectly out.
Yeah.
Not too much and not too little.
Because that was a tune I was like, oh, this is an E, and it's kind of moves a lot. Not that E is a hard key, but it's like if you're gonna play on that tune in a certain way, it's like it's not like the easiest thing to like kind of thread bebop style changes on on a tune in E with that moves that way. But I liked the challenge of that, and also because Rudy would always play with a certain kind of intensity that where I was just like, well, I'm just gonna clearly it's time to go in that direction. But also we played those songs like a lot. So after a while, I would just some days I'd be just like, well, fuck it, I'm just gonna.
Well, it still very much fit in.
That's
the
cool.
music,
Okay,
but it was like just perfectly out enough for us to all perk our ears up. Anyway,
it's interesting. People
would
think probably, oh, don't do that on that, but actually something juxtaposing could work really well. You know what I mean?
Well, my version of that, it would just be like on those tunes. It's like I don't, even though I definitely have my preferences as to what I like to, there's things that we like to play and things that we like to listen to, and they don't always line up. Sometimes they really don't line up.
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in just kind of like just imposing my, like if I'm like imposing my whatever, like my anything abstruse on something that's supposed to be kind of more inherently folk based and melodic, even though that could be interesting too. But it's like if you're playing in a group and it's not my group, that I'm not leading it.
Yeah. It's probably me as a piano player was also, listening in that way.
Right.
So I certainly don't want you to think that you were overtaking the group or anything.
No, I didn't think that.
Yeah.
I was just, it's something, that's just my thing that I would think about in that group. Ironically, towards the end of that time, of the main period of time that group played, we did a long run at the Jazz Standard, and which got recorded and became this like 8-disc like box set thing. It was just like the whole 4 nights but 2 sets, and that was the night where like, well, these are our last gigs for probably a while. I'm just gonna not really worry about these things at all, and just and that's kind of what Dave always wanted anyway. He never really, he definitely had thoughts early on in the group as to like how he wanted things to go.
Yeah.
But he wasn't like, you need to, you need to play this way or that way.
Did you have a lot of gigs before the album came out, or was that album
before which? Before
Be Still?
Before Be Still? No, actually, the recording session for Be Still and Time Travel, they were the same session.
Oh, okay.
Was the first time that band played.
Oh, wow.
We had like rehearsals,
like
2 rehearsals, and then we did the recording session. Then we played a bunch of gigs.
Yeah.
So that kind of hits on what I'm asking about. You have to be, for improvisation, you have to be kind of relaxed in order for it to flow and not feel cramped and all of that. But since it's these different situations, somebody else's music, like any tips for that? How to feel like, to let go, to be relaxed in that moment, even though you're playing different kinds of music, different people have their different philosophies and sort of aesthetic.
There's a few things about that. I think that speak to maybe how it's happened for me. I've always kind of improvised to some degree, even when I was pretty young and didn't really know maybe that it was even improvising. I mean, I got into jazz and improvisation, excuse me, when I was pretty young. Like I was like 11 or 12.
Okay.
And I started like checking it out like then.
Was it jazz you were checking out?
At first, yeah.
It wasn't Cecil Taylor at first or anything like that.
I got my first Cecil Taylor album when I was 13 or 14.
Okay, so
Wow,
you
that's awesome.
did sort of have, all right.
Yeah, it just sort of worked out nicely that way. But it was that, and then it was like I was into like contemporary classical music too. Like I got into like the Rite of Spring around.
See,
that
I
age
hear
too.
all of that when I was listening to you.
So I've always been comfortable with improvising I think I've always had despite what I was just saying about like wanting to like improvise in the right way and say like the Dave Douglas Band or other similar situations, I've kind of never really, I think I have a healthy degree of not caring what people think about what I do musically.
Great. Yeah.
Which I kind of think anyone whose music I value
Key ingredient.
has that.
Yeah.
Because it's like otherwise you're going to like, you can kind of tell when someone's playing in such a way that I used to see, but when I was on social media, I'm not anymore. You used to see people like talking about you gotta consider the audience and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
To me, that's sort of ridiculous. What that really is just code for I don't like what this person does musically. They're talking about something that they just don't like. That's just not to their taste.
Right.
Because they're the audience for that person or whatever.
Yeah. In sports, they call it the clutter. If you're thinking about what the reporter's going to write about you or how many stats you're getting, you can't perform. You're going to drop. You'll just fumble the ball off your leg. You know what I mean? So,
I mean, maybe certain types of super self-absorbed personalities can deal with that. But I mean,
yeah.
I mean, I guess
maybe.
one has to be a little maybe making music in the way we do is by definition slightly a little self-absorbed. But
Yeah.
because how are you going to get better at it if you don't constantly think about yourself and work on
Right.
yourself?
Some of my biggest
Yeah.
heroes, Miles, Keith, they're definitely self-absorbed people.
They're not known
But
for
something happens on the
warmth.
stage where they kind of go into like a primal mode where they're not really thinking about it like that, you know? So,
Right.
yeah.
But I mean, yeah. So improv. I was always comfortable with improvising, and I was always a good sight reader of music, and I always liked a lot of different kinds of music. If you compose music, and you have any sort of tendency to kind of like push it, you know, if you push it for yourself, by which I mean like, you know, try things that maybe are like new to you, and that are not so easily sight readable or whatever.
Right.
If it's that way for you, it's going to probably be that way for other people. And not everyone wants to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
I think so.
I prefer to do that. And I get
It's exactly what I'm getting at is this comfort zone sort of mentality that
it's
people,
just where my brain, it's just kind of where my brain lives. It's like,
Yeah.
you just kind of have to want it. The thing is, it's like, you kind of just have to want it.
Do you would you say you enjoy being pushed out of your comfort zone? Like if it's something like, wow, this is completely different than anything I've ever done. We just did one of these episodes with Wadada Leo Smith. Shout out to Wadada Leo Smith. And he handed us a composition that on the drive up there, we were like,
The night
I don't,
before, yeah.
I don't know what this is. I don't know how you're supposed to play this at all.
Notation system.
It's not the it's not the painted notations. It had notes on a stat, but it had like 3 different clefs, and we couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so I guess we're just gonna see. And he ended up saying kind of like, look, you can pick some stuff out of this content and do what you want with it. It was semi-improvisational, so but I don't know. It's very enlivening when you don't know what's going to happen and you don't really understand what the person is doing. But I think a lot of people these days, especially, get freaked out by that. You know.
I mean, it just depends on who it is and what it is. It's like after a certain point, it's like, yeah, somehow I've just made this career out of like being a person who just does what you just described. Just like people have me play their music, and I think it's just because also I just kind of like to, I don't know, there's a certain amount of like just going for it, a certain amount of energy that I like in the improvising too.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't like wide dynamic range, but I don't like overly polite approaches.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Like I prefer like when drummers,
I like to play so quiet
Yeah.
nobody can hear it, and so
Yeah.
loud that it's like, I like.
Yeah.
That's my thing. I like drama.
I like I like drummers who are a little maybe borderline too loud.
Sure.
Or sometimes too loud.
Yeah.
But as opposed to just like, but at the same time, it's just like I also prefer not having to fight to be heard.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just like certain kinds of energy. I don't know. It's
There's a big difference
it's always
between
a little-
dynamics and like somebody's just crowding the space and not
Right.
letting anybody breathe. Talking about that, you were talking about your upbringing and musically. How much of an idea did you have about how you wanted to sound at what point? You know what I mean? Like you're talking about listening to jazz and Cecil Taylor and classical music when you're really young. Did you already have, like, I know cats that like they they started out being like, no, I want to be like a free, contemporary, kind of classical sort of, straddle the fence sort of. And then I know people that were like, no, I want to sound like Herbie. And then at some point they just realized, I don't sound like that. That's not how I think or play or walk or breathe or any of that. So I'm just going to do what is natural to me. Did you have an idea for what you were going for that early, or maybe?
I mean, I've always had music in my head, like really specific music, like
Okay.
music that I've later composed, either later composed or composed something and like it, or I mean, I guess to a degree, yeah. I always had some kind of idea.
So you were practicing sort of an ideal of how you might want to sound in the future.
Sort of. I mean, or just like
It's a complicated question.
maybe what would be like considered like a baseline of possibilities
Okay.
for that sort of thing. It's like I knew I always liked a lot of things, and for me the challenge has always been what to focus on in like
Yeah.
individual moments.
That's come
I
up
think we're
with a
li-
lot of guests. I'm the same. Yeah.
Yeah, we're like that.
For me, it's just like my solution to that is just pick a thing and then work on it until either your interest flags, and then maybe try to keep going a little bit past that, but there's no sense of beating a dead horse, and then just pick another thing, and then you just keep doing that, and suddenly
So really,
15 years pass.
there you go. That's
Exactly.
what I think too. I hear a lot of people. I go to this place where a lot of musicians practice, and it seems like they have a book of patterns, and they're just like constantly going through one thing to another to another to another. But I think it's better to like invest in one thing really hard until you're exhausted with
Also, I never really practiced patterns.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, me neither.
I'm not like anti it. I just never
You are
did.
just making me feel better and better.
Yeah.
Everything you say, I'm like, oh, this is
Another
great.
thing I rarely practiced was scales.
You did. You said you did practice scales.
No,
Didn't
rarely
practice.
did.
Yeah.
After a
Oh.
certain point, I'm not a good boy about
Yeah.
scale practice.
Kind of like scales. I don't know.
I don't really dislike them. Actually, I'm at the point now where I would, but now I'm just like feel self-conscious about practicing them because I don't feel like I'd be get. I mean, whatever. It's just like it was
So
always
what
like
do
one of
you
those.
practice, or did you practice?
It was always a
if you don't
variation
practice?
on stuff. I would just practice improvising.
How? Just sit
Just
down
by
and play.
improvising.
Okay. You
Great.
didn't play along with records or.
Sometimes, not a whole lot of that.
Yeah.
I used to transcribe a lot of solos from basically between when I was 15 and 20. Was when I transcribed solos, like a lot.
Like jazz standard solos or
Some and
Yeah.
some just It was just the pianists and a few other types of instrumentalists that I like. Basically, like Herbie Hancock and Keith Jarrett, and then other people.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, that's
some
awesome.
Bud Powell.
Nice.
Whatever.
Ooh.
A couple Wayne Shorter solos.
Yeah, speaking my language here.
Oh wow, saxophone. That's
Yeah, just
usually it's the other way. We study piano music.
How do you teach somebody one of your pieces if you yourself think the piece is quite difficult? Like, what do you expect of people?
Well, if we're talking about like a situation where I'm hiring someone for like a gig.
Yeah, let's say yes. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, I've done, and it's an evolving thing, but I've done some level of vetting of them from afar.
Uh-huh.
Like I've tried to assess whether I think, because you can have someone who's super, super down, but maybe just doesn't realize the work or the level of difficulty involved.
Yeah.
So in which case, that's going to be a non-starter. And there are a lot of people who are probably more of these people who are like could do it just don't want to, like they can't because their mindset's wrong.
Uh-huh.
Well, there's that too. People who would do it but are just so busy. There's a lot of people who I know would play with me, but I'm not gonna like hire people just for their name, just to get them on the gig.
Uh-huh.
And they would happily do it, but they can't spend enough time to like learn the music or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sit and like kind of spoon feed it to someone or whatever. I don't want to have a rehearsal just so they can actually like take the time to actually do what I know they could just have
Right.
done
So
at home.
you would send the music ahead of time and expect people to have looked at it prior to
That's a
getting together.
thing. That's
Yeah.
a thing that all composers should do.
Yeah.
And I think most of them do well enough,
Mm-hmm.
at least in my experience. The thing is, as a composer, you have to have expectations in line.
Yeah.
Because it's not cool to just be the petulant, like, like no one plays my music correctly kind of guy. Which I kind of was for years in a way, not really just because I just didn't. It took me a long time to realize that like what tended to come out of my brain was just not something that people could get to really quickly. Even, and that's the case even in New York with the best players, and that's just the way it is. So yeah, I always give people I try to give people a minimum of 2 weeks before like the first rehearsal, because that way I'm like, they've had it for 2 weeks. So if they're super far behind or whatever, and at least it's not like I lord it over them. I at least can say I gave them time, Yeah. And so then whatever, And also I just know how it goes. Sometimes you get to a rehearsal, they've maybe had it for 2 weeks, and then like 2 days before is when they first look at it and they're like, oh, whoops, And I'm just guessing,
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, anytime I've done a record, usually it's at that point, it's just been like lots of rehearsals have happened, and it's just, everyone has, that's the thing. It's like, there's a thing about New York where it's like, it kind of works against you. The feature is also the problem, where it's like, there's a lot of insanely capable people here, but they're all pretty busy. And so you really have to have, on top of the ability and willingness, you have to have people who are also just have the time. It's really just about relationships with people.
Yeah.
You've been involved with SIM for a while, right? That's
Well, it's been quite a while since I have been.
Okay.
But I did 4 years of SIM.
Yeah. SIM is the School for Improvisational Music. It's kind of based sort of roughly in Brooklyn, right? So I wanted to ask about that. We talked to Wadada about the AACM and how powerful that was he kind of didn't want to call it a collective, but whatever. And I don't see much of that going on these days. It seems like everybody's got their project, and I hired these guys, and then I didn't get famous, I'll hire these guys for the next project. But SIM is a little bit different. It's kind of in the middle of those two extremes, right? It's a collective of people who've been connected for a long time, and you guys don't just teach at the school and all of that. You play on each other's albums, you collaborate, you do some of this. It seems like everybody there is tending to play with each other a whole lot. So
it's happened that way. I mean, the AACM, that was, I think, I'd have to go back and brush it up, but that was kind of born out of necessity as a way for like these black musicians in Chicago to like just do stuff.
Yeah.
Who wanted to do new stuff.
Yeah, it was a philosophy.
And Muhal was the kind of the father of the whole thing. And Sim specifically is the baby of Ralph Alessi.
Right.
And he's just hiring people whose musicianship he values, to be teachers. And so yes, that's true that we do tend to play on a lot of each other. That's kind of how I met Sim is how I met most of the people in New York.
Yeah. Cool. I'd love to get into the school for teaching. I teach for the conservatory, and they have it there in the summer and all that. But I'd really like to get into it to be like, in the club with like this. It seems like to me like everybody's collaborating a lot in that kind of.
Yeah, it's definitely.
I know it's a little less formal than that, but.
I think I think that's mainly a product of the fact that like a lot of the people he hires are friends of each other and of him, and associates and whatever. And he was hiring. I mean, because I know Ralph from when I was in grad school at Eastman in the 90s. Okay. Because he was teaching there then. That was pre-SIM. And so in like 2000, in the mid 2000s, we kind of started working together again. And it was 2008 when we met. That was the first year I did SIM. And that was the first year I got lucky. And that was the first year I really kind of met Tim.
Oh, wow.
Also.
Yeah.
Cool year.
I wanted to ask about that. Kat and I play in a duo. We've done it for about over 5 years. And I think that relationship with two musicians is actually really special. When you have 3 people playing or 4 or 12, it's like, okay, it's a democracy of how we determine what the groove, the feel, what we're doing exactly is. But when it's 2, it's when you're playing, it's like it's just you over there. You know what I mean? And
Right.
like, and we talked a little bit about this before about how she has a lot of like power when it comes to harmony. Like she can take it a different way with one stroke. And you've done this with Tim for how long? You guys have been playing for
Well, we've been playing together
a while.
in various ways since then, since 2008.
What about duos? Can you just talk? I don't really have a question. Can you just talk about the relationship there and the intimacy of that?
I like it. Sometimes I don't want to do the work involved in the duo. You know, I kind of like sometimes want.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, it's like you're bearing more of the load, you know, and I just don't always feel like doing that. It just depends on the situation. Like with Tim, it's different because we play together so much, and I've played so much of his music.
Are you referring to booking or composing?
No,
or
musically.
The music.
Like you can't like lay out for a while and have the bass player play.
Yeah.
Yeah, or just like, you know, sometimes
Yeah.
a little bit of it for me is that because I've played in Snake Oil, which has no bass.
Yeah.
A lot of times that's a thing I get hired to do is play in bands that have no bass.
Yeah.
Right. I noticed that.
Which is cool, and you know, and I do it.
Yeah.
You have the duo album with the drummer, right?
Well, yeah, that I view that as like as almost like just kind of me playing solo, but with it's like or two people playing solo at the same time.
I think there's so many piano players who wouldn't do that though.
Play duo with a drummer?
Yeah.
Well, it's only because not only. I mean, I actually played duo with Dan Weiss, and I played duo with Kate Gentile a lot. Partially just because we're together. She's my girlfriend. We live together and we do music together all the time. But also just because musically we're probably even more similar than me and like say Tim or me and Chess Smith or Dan. But really, it's just about intent and how it's presented. It's more just.
Kat's the perfect balance because she can go anywhere really quickly. She's very sensitive, but also she's not imposing at all. It's great.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
No, it's not. It's my favorite.
You gotta
selfish. It's not. I'm not being nice.
That's the thing.
Sick, crazy ears on this one, and like an instinctive, like I don't know. We joke that we have telepathy or something. I just think that when you have three people, it's like a tripod. You know, it's stable enough that if one person derivates or something, like the other two kind of like keep it there. But when there's two people and somebody goes a certain direction, it's like a line sort of wobbling. It can go really quickly somewhere else. You know, there's a different freedom. I think.
Well, that's definitely true. And then if it's I think the thing about playing duo is you tend to do it once you already have a sense of how well it's going to go a lot of the time.
Okay.
Maybe.
So meaning you're more likely to possibly get to that zone because you know it's someone you can trust who's going to like.
I think you said the magic word.
We should talk about Snark Horse because it's a relatively recent. It was released in the summer, July. 6 CD box set. Everybody, go look it up. Bandcamp and where else? Wherever.
I guess it's on Apple Music.
Okay.
If you must stream.
Right.
But that's the only one it's on. It's not on Spotify.
Okay. So you
Yay.
and Kate Gentile, sick drummer, you're the composers for Snark Horse.
Yes.
Just the two of you.
Yes.
And it's one bar. And how different are these bars and what is going on and why is it just one bar and what happens in the whole piece?
We were listening on the way here when you were coming over and we were like, what's going on here?
I know.
You mean how different from each other are the
I'm
bars?
asking for the audience.
Yeah, what's happening? There's a one bar composition and then you repeat it, but it's changing.
Well, it just came about years ago, a long time ago, like around 2013, where we were, I don't know, talking about writing music and stuff, and just because we were each individually writing music for our own things, and then at some point, I'm sure I read this somewhere or heard about it from someone, but I just got the notion that like even if you're like if you have the slightest inclination to write music, but you're like either you're not feeling super inspired or you're feeling over inspired and you can't decide what to focus on, either way, at the very least, you can write a bar of music and 1 bar of music a day. Yeah, and some of the bars are short. Yeah, there's like a couple bars that are like 1 bar is actually in 2/4 or whatever, but it's like 4.
What's the longest bar? I guess it depends on tempo too, so that's a weird question.
There's a bar of Kate's.
92 or something.
I have a bar that's like 63,
Wow.
34.
Eighth note equals 50.
It's really kind of, which is
Say
really
63, 34?
no, 32. I mean,
Oh, okay. Well, I had a friend who used to joke, a composer. He said, if you can write something in 11/7, that's it. You've hit it.
well, this one bar,
There's no 7. You know
this
what I
one
mean?
bar
It's
of
like-
Kate's
Yeah, I get it,
is actually, it's sort of 4 slow beats where it's like 11 over 4, 11 over 6, 11 over 7, and 11 over 5, or
Gotcha.
one of those.
You could
And-
do one of those plus things, you mean? Yeah.
Well, it's really, I see it. It's basically in 4/4.
Ah.
Because it's like dee bum 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 bum
Okay.
bum 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 bum. So it's like, and that's the bar.
So
Yeah.
it does feel like 1 bar.
Well, yeah, you could. That could be debatable.
Okay, so what happens after you set it into motion, this bar, and it keeps repeating? Or do you have a plan for how it's going to
No.
kind of morph?
No, that's the whole point. Was that so? After a while, so getting back to we amassed a certain amount of these things, and we didn't really have the notion that we'd actually play the bars. But then we were like, well, what if we did?
Yeah.
So we started to do some gigs where we would just like play. So we just have a few of them. We'd be like, okay, we'll just kind of start with this bar, and then we'll end with this bar, and then we'll just improvise.
Great.
And so all we would do is give. So it was never just the two of us. It would always be like the two of us and at least one other person. And it was just sort of a way to like kind of play our music, but not have it necessarily be like super, super long.
Rehearsey.
Yeah, rehearsey music.
And the bars, do they always repeat and then evolve? Or
Well,
is it... Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, basically, yes. We don't really tell people what to do or how to do them. We always just, anyone we're playing them with, we just give, everyone has the same chart. Like they have my piano chart, albeit transposed for transposing instruments. So they're reading like a chart that has multiple clefs and has chords. I don't remove the chords for the single line instruments.
Right.
I just give it to them and just say, you're reading the same thing.
Yeah.
Just figure out, it's on you to
Yeah.
figure out what
Cool.
to play
Cool.
from this. I'm not going to tell you what to play. We don't tell people what to play when. We just give them this thing. And then, so we say, we'll start out improvising. We'll eventually come to this bar. We'll improvise some more. Then we'll either end or go to this other bar.
Yeah.
And that's it, really. And so, and we off and on since 2013, we would do gigs with different, basically anyone who's on the record has done like several of these gigs with us.
Yeah.
And then, you know, when it came time to do the record, we were just, I was thinking for years it would be like, well, I don't know if I want to go into the studio. Really ideal would just be to do like a few live sets and record them. And then I was like, well, I just kind of wanted the sound to just be a little bit more. I wanted a little bit more of a control
Pro
over
sound,
that.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. So we just, you know, we did 3 days in the studio, and I kind of we had this sort of like elaborate system of when people came, and
Do you have any examples, something really unexpected that happened?
almost none of the endings or beginnings were really rehearsed at all. We just knew they would just end somehow.
Yeah.
There's a couple tracks where just like the ends sound actually composed because like we're hitting, you know, people are hitting things at the same time, but it's in the context of improvising. And we're all in different rooms too, so there's no cues. It's not like I can even like kind of like sneak a peek at like if someone's if Brandon
Oh,
Seabrook's
that's cool.
but there would just be things where just like I go bam, and then someone else hits something at the same time, and it's like, well, okay. And then like there's a couple tracks where it would just happen like 5-6 times in about 20 seconds.
Wow. That's the magic, yeah.
Wow.
Where it was just like
shit.
it's just hilarious hearing it in retrospect.
So we're like over time here, so we can cut. We have these 2 segments. I don't know if she
I
sent you the
told
thing.
them,
One is called like "Wish I'd Known Then." It's just something if you want, you don't have to share something that you wish you'd known when you were younger.
I remember getting advice from a teacher at one point who said, "Take every gig that you get offered."
Oh, I had the same advice from John LaBarbera, Joe LaBarbera's brother. He's an arranger. He said, "Say yes and then figure out how to do the gig. Don't turn down a gig."
Right.
That's very interesting.
In a vacuum, that's terrible advice.
Okay.
But when someone is saying that to a younger aspiring musician, they probably don't literally mean
No.
take every gig all the time.
No, they mean like you're going to learn a lot. Don't say no. Don't stay in your comfort zone. And I think he was saying it to me like, don't be afraid to take a gig. You can figure out how to do it later or something like that. And you're talking to a 20-year-old kid, so yeah.
And a lot of times it's like, no matter how expansive a young mind might be, they often it takes a while to learn to not take people literally. The better thing to say to someone would be, you should take every type of gig at least once. Maybe.
Okay.
Take it once. Do it once. Because then the implication is like you
You never define your
I'm taking
career,
every
you
gig and
I know.
taking every gig and I hate every gig I'm taking.
Yeah.
For a while when you're young, that can be the
I
case.
feel like I'm actually still unlearning that. Take every gig.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I'm thankful for being, there were
Of
times where I was
course,
starving
of course.
and, as a saxophone player, you don't get called as much as a rhythm section person. And I'm thankful I was thrust into situations where I had to play like merengue music for kids. And I was like, the guy asked if I
Sounds
played,
awesome.
he asked if I played merengue and my answer was, yeah. And I went home and tried to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't know, growth wise, it's fine. But I to define yourself as like a splayed, I'll do anything kind of person, I think can be a hindrance. So
This is maybe a few lessons wrapped into one to answer your question, but there's also just like
it's great. We just
You
want to
don't have
capture
to-
some of your wisdom. So,
you don't have to apologize ever for saying no either.
I
That's
think
another
so.
thing.
I think
thank you
you're
for
right.
telling me that.
I think you're right.
It's like, no one, and you don't owe anyone explanations either.
Thank
That's
you
a thing
again.
for me.
Yes.
You don't have to be busy on the day of the gig.
That's right. Yeah.
Also, to say no that you're
Right.
too busy.
Yeah.
If you're too busy,
Mm-hmm.
too busy just means you're too busy. You
Yeah.
don't have to give an itemized, and you don't really owe anyone. The only time you really owe anyone an explanation is if you say yes to a gig and you don't show up.
Right.
Oh, that sounds.
Then you owe someone an explanation. Or you call them and just like, really, I mean, there's that's the thing though. It's like anyone who's worth a shit as a person will understand a pretty high level of kind of weird behavior or weird occurrences.
Well, Matt Mitchell, thank you for saying yes to being on our show. Really appreciate that. It's
Well,
very in depth. There's a lot of wisdom here, a lot of stuff here that in my fantasy that a 17-year-old kid watching it in Sweden would love to hear. So I really appreciate you letting us.
Well, we better
capture
hear
that.
from them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like and subscribe.
Or I want my money back.
I hate that stuff. And let's hear you play some music. that I was doing.